Hello, everybody. It's John Calder talking hedgerows again. We have the Sustainable Farming Incentive Handbook for the 2023 offer. There's 150 plus pages in it. I think 10 or so would be associated with hedgerows. Only hedgerows are going to be tackled in this video clip. What we don't have for the hedgerows is the guidance notes that will be issued probably in August alongside opening invitations for application of agreements. But having seen some really prescriptive and overly negative guidance notes in draft back in April, I think DEFRA got the message that they need to produce something which is uplifting and positive and encouraging people to find ways to step forward and adopt these actions rather than things to give them a panic attack, but we don't know. But nonetheless, guidance notes are only guidance notes. And although they will have an impact, what really matters is what the handbook says. And I want to go through that with you because I want you to feel empowered to collaborate amongst a number of non-government organizations who are strong lobbyists on hedgerows in order to get a concerted input into DEFRA, making sure that any shortcomings that we find and agree upon in the existing standard for 2023, the 3 actions for 2023, that those could be amended and corrected for 2024 with either adjustments to the contents or additional actions. So what I want to do is I want to emphasize that there are some very strong positives to say about what's been released. And when I speak to farmers, as I do this great big Dorset hedge project, which I'm the project manager for, the message to the farmer who's hesitating and considering the sustainable farming incentive is that in the hedgerows actions in isolation, there is much to be said in favor of just taking the initiative and getting started, even if you start only on the hedgerow actions alone. Some aspects of the 3 hedgerow actions released for 2023 make perfect sense, and they would have the intended benefits if they are adopted. Now, other aspects fall well short of the expectations we would have had and the aspirations that we would have expressed in the practitioners work group for hedgerows. But they will be emphasized in this presentation, but I don't particularly emphasize them when I'm talking to farmers. The continuous enhancement and extension of our hedgerows is the objective for the great big Dorset hedgerow project down here in Dorset. But it should be the expectation of this scheme for hedgerows countrywide. So that raises a question. Do we have the necessary ideas and can we collaborate amongst ourselves to get to a clear and unified recommendation that suggests where improvements can be made to deal with these shortcomings? What we have is what we have to put up with for 2023, and it's what I have to sell to the farming community every time I visit them and do surveys under the Great Big Dorset Hedge project. But for 2024, surely there is scope for adjustments that DEFRA could make to address all the shortcomings that you and I could find. It takes a bit of effort on our part to coordinate and come up with those observations. So starting first with the positives, up to £1,000, depending on whether you've got 40 hectares or not in the scheme, is available for a gesture towards the time you have to invest in front of your computer or faffing around with your cameras or doing filing that enables you to support such a scheme as the SFI, and the rest of the schemes are the same. Up to £36 per 100 meters may not be a lot of money compared with the kind of money that came from the basic payment scheme, but £36 per 100 meters is not to be sniffed at if you know how to deliver the right results against those 3 actions. The fact that this scheme is stackable on other schemes is of vital importance, and I bless the fact that DEFRA have made that clear. It's important in the area I live in because I know of people who have had countryside stewarships for a long time and have refused to include the hedgerow standard within it because they found that standard far too prescriptive. And we now have much more flexibility, so such farmers with their existing countryside stewardship schemes with no hedgerow content can overlay that scheme with a sustainable farming incentive, with hedgerows being the only addition, and the hedgerows will benefit from the result, and those farmers will benefit as a result. It's a glorious step forward to the fact that we've got an agreement that can be amended every year. I think that's a big challenge for the RPA, but that's a whole different story. This is of vital importance that it's amended every year, so people with tentative ideas about participating can do modest things in year one, learn that everything's hunky-dory, and be more ambitious in years 2 and 3, and renew after year 3, hopefully. And finally, it was essential, but I suppose it had to be spelled out, that through the sustainable farming incentive, you have access to the capital grants. There are options for CS, for laying, coppicing, planting, gapping up, and presumably fencing to protect that investment also. So there's a lot that is really, really good. And every time I'm talking to farmers, I absolutely emphasize that fact. It's also true that the capital grant levels, the payment rates, were adjusted last January. So at that time, it became more realistic to say that these funds more or less covered the cost of what was happening. That's really good. Of course, inflation continues to bite hard, so let's get on with using that. So now I'm going to take you through all the handbook details that relate to hedgerows. Tedious as that may be, but you can pause if you want to read the whole thing, because I will skip through talking about what's of interest. The first action, assess and record hedgerow condition, is easy once you know what you need to do. The second action is easy because it's more flexible than what we've had in countryside stewardship previously. And a third action is easy for some who have got the trees at the appropriate density already, and hence, you know, a non-event for those who haven't, because the money available through this scheme is not enough to make people feel motivated to put extra in hedge trees unless they're really near the target already, in my opinion. The actions above should help to do all the things listed below. No problem there. So let's talk about the first action, which is to assess and record hedgerow condition. £3 per 100 metres for one side of an eligible hedgerow per year does not cover the costs of doing the Adams Code assessment across your farm. However, it's what we paid, and I'm pleased to see that it's paid every year. So I don't like the fact that it was set at £3 per 100 metres. I'm going to have to live with the fact that it's set at £3 per 100 metres. The aims are good, and where you can do it is clear. No problems there. I think we have to dwell on the thought that what we want from this action and what we pay for from this action could be reassessed. So that's the first area where I think we could all discuss where we'd rather see this go next year. Very pleased to see the compatibility with the other schemes. What you have to do is fine, but here is a message I sent to Jonathan Morrison, who heads up the design features of all the schemes that come out of DEFRA. There was an omission, and you can read that if you want to, but basically I'm saying having the heavy load of interconnects with the PTES website was a good thing to remove from the guidance notes that we saw in April, but forgetting to mention what the Adams coding is was a mistake. So when the guidance notes come out, you can be certain that there's going to be some reference in there to the fact that we're talking about hedgerow conditions as defined in the Nigel Adams assessment process. So that will be put right, I am sure, by DEFRA. When you do it, That's no problem with that. And how you do it and what evidence to keep, well, fine. No problem with any of that. How much you'll be paid for the management of hedgerows? Well, I don't want to go into how £10 for 100 meters was calculated, because what you're talking about is lots of different actions or interpretations of the action requirements. So nonetheless, that's what we've got. That's what we've got to live with. And it gives us access to the capital grants to make changes, which is good. The aim of the action is to manage, is to get to a range of different heights and widths. Really annoys me. I've done a lot of surveys in Dorset now of hedgerows across scores of parishes. And in some parishes, consistently across the parish, you can find hedges that are in appalling condition, and yet they have variations in heights and widths. So this isn't quite what it needs to be, but it is what we have now. And so stop worrying, we can't do that. Where you can do the action, not a problem. All these things are not a problem. Not a problem. What to do? Well, that's fine. I will come back to incremental cutting. The first option is to cut on rotation once every 3 years, which is a traditional countryside stewardship practice. It is not practice where I live because our hedges grow fast, and cutting a hedge with 3 years growth is going to damage that hedge structurally. And so, theoretically, this is an option. To many, it's not a consideration. But it doesn't matter because you've got alternatives. Second alternative, on rotation, cut the hedgerow no more than once every 2 years. That should be acceptable if it was pitched correctly. Or you can manage them on a coppicing rotation. I have lots of hedges where we don't touch it with a flail apart from perhaps a side cut occasionally. And they are on a coppice rotation. They are allowed to grow up. And over a 5 to 7 year period, they'll come back down to the ground again. So going back to the novel introduction of incremental cutting, this is very welcome indeed. Of course, as a member of the practitioners work group, I supported both this and the Adams Code introduction vociferously alongside Nigel himself. What DEFRA don't mention is that when they are talking here about incremental cutting, they're talking about annual incremental cutting as opposed to biannual and triannual. You can do incremental cutting in biannual and triennial, but DEFRA don't choose to explore that. What they mean here is annual incremental cutting with no specified incremental distance. Possibly that will come up in the guidance notes, but it's not mentioned here, which is an enormous relief because we do not want to go back to the days when the RPA inspector goes out with a tape measure to work out what's been going on. So I'm really comfortable with this. We're comfortable with most of this, but here we go completely wrong. Once every 2 years, in late winter, cutting no more than half of the hedges each year is fine, but late winter being defined as January and February alone is problematic. It's problematic for those of us who have wet clay land. More on that later. But there is definitely scope for an idea on how to deliver the intentions of this 2 year cut with a late winter timeframe without making it what it currently is, a completely theoretical and unachievable option for those of us on wet clay. Those of us on wet clay could not possibly risk leaving our hedge trimming activities, 100% of them, until January. It's not going to happen. So that means this option won't be adopted in those kind of landscapes. On the chalk hills or on arable fields with big wildflower margins, it's not quite the same issue. because soil condition may not be under quite such a threat. Anyway, we'll come back to that. How do we do it? Not a problem. I give a thumbs down to this idea that it's brilliant to have photographs to prove what you've done. I don't think that's wise at all. I think that that's not at all a green option. The thought of everybody accumulating all that documented, stored information, paper-wise or online or on memory chips, it's just not the best way to do it. Best way to do it is to go and look at the damn thing. Anyway, maintaining or establishing in-hedge trees is a very good idea. How much you will pay, I'm not going to quibble about that. None of this is a problem, but the arbitrary adoption of the single target of one hedge every 100 meters, in my view, is a serious mistake. If I already have hedgerows that are as frequent as one hedgerow per 100 meters, I'll participate in this action. I'll take the money, which is justified, and nothing will have changed. If, on the other hand, I have a sparsely populated in-hedge tree landscape on my farm, I'm not going to be incentivized by the kind of money we're talking about here to go planting more in-hedge trees. So nothing will have changed. So this action is successful in rewarding those who have a high population of in-hedge trees appropriately for having them and living with them and coping with them, but it's going to change nothing. So there's scope for yet another new idea, but we have to live with the fact that this is what the scheme says currently. No further problems are here to be reported. I do like the idea that specifically we're encouraging that existing standards that are in the hedge are allowed to become full-grown trees. For a while, I was niggled by the fact that you would state the blindingly obvious that you shouldn't be cutting down the trees that you're calling trees. But Nigel persuaded me that he sees it happening all the time, so I've got to live with the fact that therefore I need to tell farmers that if you've got an in-hedge tree or counting as an in-hedge tree, that you shouldn't chop it down every time you flail. Fine. Again, giving photographs is not really the way to go. I have a different way to go. Here's one field, parcel number 3107. If I keep a record of the in-hedge trees that surround that field, I would keep a very simple record. So here's a hedge that's actually designated with a hedge number of 2007A. It's here. I have an existing tree. I have selected 2 saplings, which are marked in a way that's appropriate for what I want to do. And I had some gaps, which I planted up with 4 separate plantings of saplings. So from a situation where I had 1 in-hedge tree on that hedge, I've now got 7 in-hedge trees, and I've got a record of it. I don't have a photograph, I have a record of it. And if somebody wants to challenge that record, they go and look at that hedge. On the edge of this field, I've got this hedge marked as 3107A. In it, I have 2 selected saplings that I'm going to create into trees because they're going to replace the 2 dead ash trees that are still standing there. So for the terms of this scheme, I've got 4 trees in the hedge, and I got a record of it. And then yet again, this hedge happens to be labeled with respect to this field parcel 3925B. It has 2 existing trees, and I've planted 2 saplings in gaps. So I have a record of what's happening in this field. I can have a record across the whole farm. It doesn't take photographs, it just takes a list, and that's sufficient for me. Now we talk about some restrictions that creep in from the management control of hedgerows section, and everything's fine apart from the mean-mindedness of eliminating hedgerows that are next to rows just because they're next to rows. Those hedgerows have still got carbon they're capturing, They're still, even if they're annually flailed or frequently flailed, they're still generating some pollen, some nectar. And I think it's completely mean-minded to say that the whole hedge cannot be included if you're trimming one side of it because it's on a row annually. So that's an area where I think we have to think a bit more flexibly, because a lot of us are lumbered with looking after hedgerows that used to be looked after by the local council, and they're not touched by the local council. So whether they're owned by us or not, whether it's our responsibility or not, it falls on the farmer to look after the safety issues of that hedgerow, and that's a priority over and above anything else. It's an idea waiting to be dealt with. Eligibility, I don't have a problem with any of this. I'm sure there are some farmers who are frustrated by gaps being cited in this nominal way. I don't mind that at all. I think that's a very good step. And I give a thumbs up to the whole idea of saying you've got to have your gaps dealt with. So remember, it's not all bad news. We've got a very good program in some aspects, and the access to the capital grants is one of those aspects. I think there are 4 ideas looking to be solved, and I think we need to collaborate to get to the point where everybody is voicing the same solution to each of those 4 problem areas. How might the late winter biannual cutting option become a real option in those extensive wet clay landscapes? Much of the southwest would fall into that category. I don't think there's problems in finding such cases in Cambridgeshire or East Anglia. Secondly, can the true costs of the hedgerow assessment and the management planning that should follow it be brought into the scheme? Why pretend that it takes no time at all to deal with the results of the assessment and generate a hedgerow management plan? That takes a lot of effort and time. And thirdly, how do we now promote an increase in hedge planting and an increase in the occurrence of in-hedge trees? There isn't much presently making that happen, and the Climate Change Committee is looking for quite a lot of that to happen. But this doesn't deliver on that. And then finally, let's be a bit more imaginative about the roadside hedges than we have been so far. So a collaboration is sought between those most likely to be heard by DEFRA, and I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to be likely to be heard by DEFRA, because they've heard a lot from me already and they keep on telling me that I've said enough. Well, they haven't found me falling short with common sense ideas yet. However, I don't have a strong enough voice on my own. I've been talking with Nigel Adams. I've talked with lots of individuals in these organizations. What I don't see yet is a concerted effort from them to work together. Please, please, can we make it happen? Over and out.